Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Good afternoon. Hi, thank you. My name is Afton Thomas. I am our Associate Director for Programs here at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. I knew that these two speakers and the topic would draw a big crowd, so thank you all for being here. I have a few housekeeping announcements. Before we get started, there's a sign-in sheet going around. If you could please sign your name and provide your email. I promise not to spam you. We just want to send you a survey, a quick survey before the end of the week. We value your feedback, okay? Thank you to center staff, Andrew Bryant and Rebecca Law Cleary, for all of their assistance leading up to our SouthTalks each week. This is not done alone, so I appreciate my colleagues and our graduate assistants, Ashish Shrestha, who, for those who cannot join us in person, make sure that we have them available on our YouTube channel. So he records them and edits them each week, so thank you. And Deja Samuel, who is also a graduate assistant that works closely with me on logistics leading up to our SouthTalks, including what I consider to be fabulous graphics. That are eye-catching and let you know where things are taking place. So thank you to all of them. The week of December 1st, we have a lot going on. So you can get pen and paper ready or you can follow up on our website. That is the last week of classes. On Tuesday, December 2nd at 4 p.m., we will host a virtual open house for prospective students who are interested in graduate studies and Southern Studies. We have an MA and an MFA program, so we offer that virtually. You can register on our website. On Wednesday, December 3rd, from 2 to 3:30, Assistant Professor Anne Marie Anderson and her students enrolled in the Oral History and Southern Social Movements class will host an exhibit in our foyer. Students learned what oral histories are, gained experience in conducting oral histories, and participated in a class project on housing in the Lafayette Oxford community. So at this event, you can interact with the exhibit and speak with the students about their findings. So that's Wednesday, December 3rd, 2 o'clock. The next day, we're busy that week. Thursday, December 4th, we will host our third annual Southern Studies 401 fair from 4 to 6:30. In the Farrington Gallery of Bryant Hall, so a couple buildings down. Southern Studies majors and minors are required to take Southern Studies 401, which is their capstone class. Hear about their final projects during this poster session featuring the work of 40 students. So that's a big one, from 4 to 6:30, and there will be food. On Friday, December 5th, which is the last day of classes, we will host our final SouthTalk of the season, our annual fall documentary showcase. The event will be held at Barnard Observatory right here in this room and in our gallery space at 6 p.m. with a reception and mingling in the gallery to view student work. You'll hear from documentary showcase participants who are students enrolled in documentary courses this semester. Whew. Okay, and now for the reason you are all here. I'd like to introduce our speakers. This year, the center's theme is Reading the South. While not all events need to align with this theme, this one certainly does, both literally and figuratively, by offering a reimagining or re-envisioning of Greenfield Farm. I couldn't think of two more suitable individuals to speak on the subject, not just because they have conducted extensive research on Greenfield Farm and Faulkner, but because of how they have approached their careers and interests. You will see what I mean when I share their brief introductions, which do neither of them justice, but we will let them slide for the sake of time. Jim Gulley is a native Mississippian who retired from the Coca-Cola Company in 2018 after 28 years with the company. In 2020, he embarked on a second career in academia, earning an MA in history from the University of Mississippi in 2023 and beginning a doctoral program in history from Southern Methodist University later that year. John T. Edge serves as writer in residence in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric and directs the Mississippi Lab, where he leads the development of Greenfield Farm Writers Residency. His latest book is a memoir, House of Smoke, A Southerner Goes Searching for Home. In 2022, Edge appointed Gulley as the research fellow for the Greenfield Farm Writers Residency project. Please help me give a warm welcome to Jim Gulley and John T. Edge.
I'm the warm-up act. I'm going to be here shortly, and then Mr. Gulley is going to take the stage. I just want to give you a little bit of context for what's to follow. So I started a new job at our university about 3.5 years ago, to develop creativity initiatives for our campus, and so that we might see the impact both here on the campus and in concentric circles going out through the state. And so we've developed 3 projects. My colleague Mary Conaway is probably in here somewhere, but we've developed 3 projects: staff creative residencies, faculty laureates, and then the larger project is this Greenfield Farm Writers Residency. This idea was inspired by Ann Abity, appropriately enough, to say that in this room. And I remember when I first arrived in Oxford around 1995, soon after, Ann showed me plans for what Greenfield Farm could be. She knew about this property, she cared about this property, and wanted to see it put to good use. So that inspired me when I stepped into this new role. I thought about Ann's want to put that property to good use. The other thing I thought about is when I was doing my due diligence, I went to visit other writers' residencies across the South. And I went to Tulane and visited their Studio in the Woods. And they had just conducted, though the Studio in the Woods had been operating for decades, they had just that year begun to do land research to know the history of the land they inhabit, because they knew that people were coming there to spend a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for them in the woods doing creative work, would want to know the story of the land they're inhabiting for that amount of time. So their want to do that kind of in a retrospective way inspired what we are attempting to do in a prospective way before we begin. I'll talk about the path to that. At the very end of the talk, I'll come back up and talk about where we are with Greenfield. But this is an attempt to know the land. And so in the spring of 22, I got in touch with the English department, Southern Studies, and the history department and said, I'm looking for a research graduate student who could help us figure out the history of that land across time. And Noel Wilson in history presented the best candidate, and that is Mr. Jim Gulley. Jim came to us with research experience in the county courthouses, knowing his way through property records, which was key to this project. He also came with a real zeal for Mississippi history and has become a great collaborator and friend. To that end, I also wanted to take a moment to say thank you. I won't point them out at risk of embarrassing them, but many of the donors who are helping realize this project are in the room today, as well as Ralph Eubanks, who serves on our advisory committee, and a host of others, including Brooke Alexander, who has helped us collaborate on ways to engage the public with Greenfield before we begin construction. Mr. Gulley.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I really want to thank Afton for the opportunity. It's a great treat for me to be able to talk about Greenfield Farm and to share some of my scholarship. I really want to thank John T. as well. He's been a terrific mentor and coach and editor and everything. And without him, I wouldn't have had this opportunity. I also want to recognize Mr. Will Lewis, who's with us. Will was one of the primary sources for my scholarship and has been instrumental in this work, and I really appreciate him being here. Finally, thank you for my wife, Tracy, who's here, and all of her help and support. And I have a number of close friends who are here to support me, and I appreciate them being here as well. Friday morning, November the 10th, the telephone rang at Roanoke. It was long distance. New York was calling William Faulkner. When he came to the phone in the pantry off the kitchen, he heard a clear voice speaking idiomatic English with an unmistakable Scandinavian accent. It was Finn Amund, New York correspondent of the Stockholm daily newspaper Dagens Nyheter. In Stockholm, which was 6 hours ahead of New York time, the Swedish Academy had issued a statement. It had resolved to confer upon William Faulkner the 1949 Nobel Prize, quote, for his powerful and independent artistic contribution in America's new literature of the novel, end quote. After some small talk, Amund asked a routine question. Was he looking forward to the trip to Stockholm? Well, there was a pause. I won't be able to come to receive the prize myself, he said. It's too far away. I'm a farmer down here, and I just can't get away. Well, that stirring rendition is from the account of Joseph Blattner's definitive biography of Faulkner. And as you can see from this photo, Faulkner did go to Stockholm, and he was convinced to accept the prize in person by his wife Estelle, a lot of his good friends in Oxford, and in fact, his daughter Jill went on the trip with him. So our story is going to begin in January of 1938. The country was 9 years into the Great Depression. The unemployment rate was about 19%, and the storm clouds of war were gathering in Europe. Now, if the economic situation in the United States was grim, it's even worse in Mississippi. The price of cotton in 1938 was 8.5 cents a pound. It had been as high as 35 cents as recently as 1919 at the end of World War I, but fell precipitously in 1920. In 1932, it hit rock bottom at 5 cents. Mississippi had been in a depression for 18 years. William Faulkner had just published his 10th novel, The Unvanquished. By this time, he had become a celebrated author. The Sound and the Fury was published in 1929, As I Lay Dying in 1930, and Absalom in 1936. All received critical acclaim. But with all of his fame, he was chronically in debt. Now, Faulkner came from a prominent and wealthy family. His grandfather, Colonel William C. Faulkner, was a Confederate Army veteran. He founded a railroad. He was a lawyer and a large landowner up in Ripley. He was very successful. His grandfather, J.W.T. Faulkner, known as the Young Colonel, inherited the railroad from his dad and moved his family to Oxford, where he was a founder and the first president of First National Bank here in Oxford. His father, though, Murray, squandered the family fortune, and he did this by being incompetent in business and being unable to keep a steady job. Faulkner's financial difficulties were compounded by the number of households that he was supporting. So in addition to he and his wife, he was also supporting his mother, Maud. His brother had died in an airplane accident, and he was supporting his brother's widow and their infant daughter. And there were any number of workers living on the grounds at Roanoke that he was also supporting. But in February of 1938, Faulkner sold the movie rights for The Unvanquished to MGM Studios for $25,000, a sum that would be equivalent to $575,000 today. So what was he going to do with his windfall? Well, a spoiler alert, he was going to buy a farm. So what did Faulkner say about wanting to buy a farm? Well, he certainly said that he wanted to invest the money so that he would relieve some of his financial pressures. But he specifically said he didn't want to deposit it in the bank because he was afraid of just spending it and just running through it. He also said he didn't trust the stock market, that was too risky, so he considered land to be a better investment. So how did he find Greenfield Farm? Well, he talked to his brother John, who they called Johnsy, and wanted him to help find a farm, and then he wanted Johnsy to manage it for him once it was bought. So Johnsy found a listing through the Federal Land Bank in New Orleans. They had repossessed the property, and so it was available for sale. The property was 15 miles outside of Oxford, right off of Highway 30 on the way to New Albany, and it was in a rough part of the county known as Beat 2. Now, beats are jurisdictions of the county that is run by a supervisor. So let's take a look at the transaction with MGM, because based on what he actually did, his story doesn't make a lot of sense. So he sold the movie rights for $25,000, but there were expenses associated with the sale, so he netted $19,000. He paid $2,500 for the property and invested another $2,000 in things like livestock and crop seed and tools and things of that nature. But then he financed the transaction with a $2,000 mortgage from the New Orleans Land Bank, the same people that he bought it from. Now, if he had really wanted to make an investment for financial reasons, he could have bought a farm 5 times as large as this without taking on any debt at all. Well, so if he only used $2,500 of the MGM windfall, what happened to the other $16,500? Well, the short answer is, I have no idea. I just couldn't find out, which is not unusual because finding personal financial information in historical records is notoriously difficult because people keep that kind of thing private. So presumably he had a lot of debts that he had to settle, so that would have accounted for some of it. But we really don't know what happened to all of this $16,000 plus dollars. So why did Faulkner really buy Greenfield? Well, I argue in the article that was published a few months ago in the Journal of Mississippi History that Faulkner bought the farm as a trophy. It was a tangible demonstration that he had redeemed the family and redeemed the family name and then restored it to kind of this landed gentry that he felt like his family was a part of. He also bought it for recreation. So he rode horses out there. Eventually he would ride his tractor around. He went hunting, and he drank a lot of whiskey out of the farm. But it was also a sanctuary. It was just a convenient excuse to get out of the house. So you may be asking, what was Greenfield like when he bought it, and what did he do to get it started? Well, the property was 362.5 acres. 160 acres of it to the south was bottomland across the Puskas Creek. The northern part was heavily wooded. When he bought the property, there were 8 tenant families living on the property. These would be an assortment of McJunkins, which is a prominent name out there that you'll hear a lot about. There were a couple of Wilson families and an Avent family. He did go on to hire Johnsy to be the overseer of the farm, and Johnsy moved he and his family out into the farmhouse. There were a number of other structures that were on the property, tenant cabins, barns, sheds. Faulkner himself would build a cabin out there for his own personal use, which they referred to as the lodge. He stocked the farm with livestock. He bought $600 worth of mules. We'll come back to that in a minute. And he established a commissary to supply tenants and neighbors. That's also will be a recurring theme. Now, the other problem with Faulkner's stated rationale for the Greenfield Farm investment is that he insisted on running it as a mule farm. Johnsey and all of his friends had advised him to buy it and raise cattle out there, but he ignored their advice. Now, if you wanted to run a farm for profit in 1938, the last thing you would have done is planted it in cotton. And if you did that, you certainly wouldn't cultivate it with mules. In fact, the New Deal was paying people not to plant cotton at the time, but he did it anyway. So how did life change for Faulkner when he became a part of this landed gentry again? Well, first of all, this created what I call the town and country phase of Faulkner's life. So in Oxford, he was very reclusive at Roanoke, and he spent large parts of the day just typing on his typewriter and doing his writing there. He did ride his horse through Bailey Woods quite frequently. He socialized with his buddies on the square, and Estelle, his wife, lived the life of an Oxford socialite. Out at Greenfield, he stayed in the lodge. He rode his tractor. He hunted and drank whiskey with his buddies, as we've said. And Estelle rarely, if ever, went out to the farm. Now, Faulkner continued to have financial problems during this period of time. And one of the ways that he was able to make money is that he got these jobs writing Hollywood screenplay adaptations. And so he would go out to Los Angeles and live for 6 or 9 months and make some money, and then he would come back to Oxford. He really hated the motion picture business, but he needed the money so bad that he did it anyway. Faulkner did not gain financial independence until 1948 when he sold Intruder to the Dust to MGM again. So MGM was very good to him over the years. So when you think about this period of time from 1938 to 1954, these were the years when Faulkner was most engaged with the farm. During that time, he was writing on 6 different novels. Some of them sequentially, some of them he'd finish one, he'd start on another. Those 6 are, I think, on the screen, there. I was very interested when I did my research, which most of it was up in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia, to try to figure out, if Faulkner, how much of it he was writing out at the farm. And there's no direct evidence that he did this, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that he did. So when you go to the archives and you look through it, you'll see that all of his original manuscripts are either typewritten or they are handwritten. And his handwriting was really amazing. It's almost like Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's very tiny. And I think part of that was financial. He was saving paper and he was being very economical. Now, the circumstantial evidence is that there's really no evidence that he ever took his typewriter out to Greenfield. But there are these hundreds of pages of handwritten notes and handwritten prose. And it's my belief that a lot of this was written out on the farm, in the lodge. Now, he would have done us all a great service if he had written dates and provenance notes in the margins, but he did not do me that favor. It's very obvious, though, that Greenfield Farm served as what I call a living theater for him to draw upon when he was out there. The tenants certainly provided, dialogue and mannerisms and things of that nature that you see constantly crop up in his literature when you read his novels. There were a lot of physical features of the farm, from the Puskas Creek that runs through it, through the bottomland crops and the woods and farmhouses. All of these things are very common occurrences in the novels. And then certainly all the livestock, from the mules to pigs and chickens and cattle, all of those things were going on out at the farm. Well, in 1957, the University of Virginia hired Faulkner to be a writer in residence. He and Estelle began splitting time between Oxford and Charlottesville, and it was at this point that Faulkner began contemplating selling the farm, selling Roanoke, and moving out to Virginia permanently. So you may be asking yourself, well, why didn't Faulkner just teach at Ole Miss? That would seem to make a lot of sense. Well, the Faulkner and Ole Miss story is really a story of disrespect and missed opportunities. So when we think of Faulkner at Ole Miss, there are a lot of things that are common knowledge. So everybody knows that he was a student here for 3 semesters, never graduated. Most people know that he was initiated into SAE fraternity, later became the chapter advisor. Everybody, kind of knows the story of him being the postmaster and getting fired for malfeasance, and declaring that he was glad he would no longer have to put up with any son of a bitch that had 2 cents for a stamp. That's a great quote. Well, less well known is that after his fame was established, the university's English department did make a lot of attempts to get him to come and speak and do lecture series and things of that nature. They just weren't willing to pay him anything. So it was like the department expected him just to come over and provide his services and really provide his notoriety as an obligation to the university. And of course, he didn't see it that way. It was compounded by the fact that a lot of this time, he was still struggling financially, and he really could have, used the money. Well, when UVA approached him, they gave him the respect that he thought he deserved. They apparently offered him a financial package that was attractive, and so he took that job, and he really seemed to flourish in Charlottesville. Now, the other factor is that by this time, his only daughter, Jill, had married an attorney who began practicing law in Charlottesville. So then, they had another family reason up there as well. Well, I contend that the missed opportunities for Ole Miss were multifaceted. The most obvious one is that Ole Miss does not have the bulk of Faulkner's archives. Those are located at the small special collection at the University of Virginia. So they probably have 70% of all of his papers and artifacts and things of that nature. The second thing is that a UVA English professor, this Joseph Blotner, was the one that ended up writing the definitive 2-volume biography of Faulkner. And so he basically leveraged his relationship with Faulkner and the family while he was a writer in residence, and that project fell to him. Finally, Ole Miss lost the prestige of claiming him as a faculty member. So when we think about Faulkner now, we definitely think about him as an Oxonian. We just don't really think about him as being an Ole Miss person. So I think that's a shame. Early Sunday morning, June 17th, 1962, Faulkner saddled his horse, Stonewall, and went on a routine ride down Old Taylor Road and out into the country. Most likely, he left the stables that are adjacent to Roanoke and trotted out the front entrance through the canopy of cedars that we're all so familiar with. Though Faulkner rode horses all of his life, he was a notoriously poor equestrian, and he suffered falls routinely. Somewhere near the current intersection of Old Taylor Road and Highway 6, Stonewall got spooked and threw Faulkner violently to the ground. When Stonewall trotted back to Roanoke riderless, The workers there went searching and they found him in a heap, badly injured. Faulkner's health deteriorated quickly, and 3 weeks later he died of a heart attack at a sanatorium in Byhalia at the age of 64. His gravesite, which you see on the screen here, has become a quite popular tourist destination at St. Peter's Cemetery here in Oxford. And if you'd like to go out there and put a bottle of bourbon on it with the others after the talk today, you'd be highly welcome to do so. So I want to point out a few things about how Faulkner managed the farm. As I said earlier, Greenfield was predominantly a cotton farm, and with the planting in the lower half of the property along this creek bottomland, ideally cotton would have been the cash crop to pay for the operations and produce a profit. But with cotton selling for 8 to 10 cents a pound, that just wasn't going to happen. The cropland that was not devoted to cotton was planted in rows of corn. So the corn was grown for human consumption and for feed for the livestock, but most importantly, it was made to distill whiskey. So even though Prohibition ended in 1933, the local manufacture of distilled alcohol was still a vibrant activity. And I would guess in Beat 2, it's still a vibrant activity today, but we would have to go out there and check it out ourselves. Now, the northern half of the property was heavily forested, and Faulkner managed several timber sales, 3 as a matter of fact, during his ownership. The irony is that those were the only 3 years when the farm ever made a profit. So he bought the farm supposedly to ease his financial situation, yet Greenfield was a drain on his bank account for all but 3 years that he owned it. As we've said, Faulkner kept mules for plowing and horses for recreation out on the farm. And finally, Faulkner allowed the tenants to use a portion of the farm to grow vegetables, to raise hogs and chickens, and have a dairy cow, maybe a few beef cows, all things for their own personal consumption during the time that they lived out there. As I mentioned earlier, Faulkner maintained a commissary at Greenfield, and that would be best described as kind of a 1930s convenience store. So he sold staple goods out there like flour and cornmeal and salt and sugar. They also carried tools, farm implements, soap, leather, things of that nature. They occasionally sold cold drinks. And I'm proud to report that Greenfield Farm was an exclusive Coca-Cola account. So that makes me happy. Faulkner kept records of the farm operations and commissary activities in handwritten ledger books. You can see a page of it on the screen there. This is an example from 1946. The page shows some ciphering on the left-hand side of the book and transactions on the right-hand side. The names there are names of either tenants or neighbors that were doing business in the commissary. And it's interesting to note here that apparently the commissary was open on May 31st. It didn't reopen again until September the 6th. So it's not like the commissary was open every day. It was they would open it up, and the tenants and the neighbors would come in and get what they needed, and then they would close down and keep moving. One of the controversies that John T. and I are dealing with is, where was the commissary? And there is a dilapidated structure out there that some people believe was the commissary, many others don't. So there's still more research to be done. So when you think about the tenants that were there, in my research, I discovered that there were 9 tenant households, 9 families that lived at Greenfield according to the 1940 census. There were 26 other families in Beat 2, like Jim Buddy Smith, I think is depicted on the screen here, who all had credit in the Faulkner commissary. I'd like to briefly elaborate on two of the tenants. The first was a gentleman named Ned Barnett, or Uncle Ned, as he was known to the Faulkner family. Barnett had been associated with the Faulkners going all the way back to the old Colonel in Ripley, back to Faulkner's great-grandfather. Ned immigrated to Oxford and worked with Faulkner's grandfather, the banker, and also with Faulkner's dad from time to time. And he was really kind of a vagabond of sorts. He was go between Ripley and New Albany and Oxford. But he ended up living in one of the quarters on the grounds at Roanoke, but moved out to Greenfield as soon as Faulkner bought the farm. Ned was a tall man. He stood ramrod straight. He had a very dignified bearing. And one of the interesting things about him was that the old colonel and the young colonel would give him all of their old clothes. And so his normal mode of dress was very formal, in a frock coat and a top hat and a tie and a white starched shirt. And that's the way he strode around Roanoke. And a very common sight back at this time was Ned Barnett and all of his finery walking down South Lamar, going to the square to hold court with his friends. The second gentleman I'd like to mention is Lawrence Arenza McJunkins, or Renzi as he was known. McJunkins was born on August 24th, 1911, and he was born on the Parks farm. More about that in a minute. And the Parks farm later became Greenfield. So he was born out on this piece of property. He was the youngest of 9 children of Charles and Sally McJunkins. And the McJunkins family is very central to the story of Greenfield Farm. It is unknown when Charles and Sally moved to Beat 2, but they show up in the 1910 census, so a long heritage out there. By all accounts, Renzi was an industrious, intelligent, very dedicated man. He never married, but he cared for his elderly mother until her death in the 1940s. And he took in his sister-in-law and nephew when his brother George died in February of 1950. All of these folks lived out at Greenfield. Now, even though Renzi was the youngest head of household on the farm, Faulkner chose him to be the farm's manager when he returned from the service in World War II. Renzi was Faulkner's aide-de-camp on his hunting trips in the Delta, and he is the only Greenfield tenant featured in a Ford Foundation documentary filmed in 1952. These two photos are stills from that particular documentary. So, as I've said, Faulkner's experiences at Greenfield Farm undoubtedly influenced his writing. We don't really have time today in this forum to go in a real in-depth view of that, but I've chosen 3 set pieces to kind of illustrate the point. In the first edition of Absalom in 1936, this map is included in the book. And it shows the north half of his fictional Yoknapatawpha County. Now, the county is obviously derived from Lafayette County. I mean, you can just look at the map and you can see the square and you can see Highway 30 running up northeast. And the area that I have circled is the location of the McCallum farm in the novel. Now, even though Absalom was written before 1936, or 2 to 3 years before Faulkner bought Greenfield, obviously Beat 2 was still in his mind, in his imagination. Second thing that we'll look at is Intruder in the Dust. So this is a novel that Faulkner wrote during the time he owned Greenfield. The novel was published in 1948. The hero of the novel is a dignified black man named Lucas Beauchamp, who was unjustly accused of a crime. I believe that Beauchamp has a striking resemblance to Ned Barnett. And if you look at stills of Intruder in the Dust and you see pictures of Ned Barnett, you'd think it was the same person. In March 1949, MGM began filming the movie version of the novel here in Oxford. It was an economic boom for the area. Director Clarence Brown filmed 4 scenes out at Greenfield. In one, Nub Gowrie jumps off a bridge and into quicksand in search of his murdered son's body. The bridge he used spanned Puskas Creek, which is just adjacent to Greenfield Farm. I think that's the picture of it up there, which is a still frame from the movie. The movie adapted so well to Greenfield because the farm was what Faulkner was picturing as he wrote many of the passages in the novel. On Sunday night, October the 9th, 1949, the movie premiered at the Lyric Theater here in Oxford. 850 attendees jammed the theater in what was one of the largest social events in Oxford up until that time. The last anecdote I'll cover is about Greenfield's literary history is my favorite because this is just a classic example of art imitating life. So I mentioned that the young colonel, Faulkner's grandfather, J.W.T., was a founder of First National Bank and its first president. Well, in 1920, a man from Beat 2, Joe Parks, engineered a hostile takeover of the bank and ousted Faulkner and installed himself as the new president. Parks had sold his farm the year before to a G.H. Cannon and moved to town where he bought Murray Faulkner's home on North Street. The Parks farm was Greenfield, and it was Mr. Cannon who lost it to the Federal Land Bank, which then sold it to Faulkner. The thematic significance of Greenfield in Faulkner's literature becomes more profound when you realize that the farm had been in his imagination decades before he bought it. The McCallum family was a recurring cast of yeoman farmers who first appeared in Flags in the Dust as early as 1927. It was their farm that is shown in the Absalom map, and again, that's 2 to 3 years before Faulkner bought the farm. Faulkner made a direct reference to the Parks-Faulkner feud when he published The Town in 1957. In that novel, the antagonist, Flem Snopes, took over the Sartoris Bank, forced out its president, Manfred Despain, and bought Despain's house in town. So it's virtually an identical story to what actually happened between Parks and his grandfather, J.W.T. Now, here's the intriguing thing to me. The Parks farm is located exactly where the McCallum farm is located on the Absalom map. J.W.T.'s feud with Joe Parks was a central part of Faulkner family lore, so Faulkner knew about this farm all of his life. Now, I don't think John C. Faulkner just randomly found some piece of land that was in a New Orleans land bank foreclosure notice. In my view, this, as much as anything, explains why Faulkner bought Greenfield, and it adds a tremendous amount of texture to his story of redemption. Well, after William Faulkner died in 1962, his only daughter, Jill Summers, inherited his estate, which included Greenfield Farm. She allowed Renzi McJunkins to remain at Greenfield for the rest of his life. Renzi died on December 15, 1969, and Mrs. Summers sold Greenfield to her cousin Jimmy Faulkner 2 months later. In 1982, Jimmy Faulkner sold Greenfield to a Malcolm Reese. Now, while we don't know the exact sales price, we do know that Reese financed the purchase with a $350,000 loan from, you guessed it, First National Bank of Oxford. 5 months later, Reese sold the northern 200 or so acres of the farm, the forested part, to Dunlap and Kyle Realty. Now, these are the same folks who own Gateway Tire on University Avenue. Dunlap and Kyle then flipped it to the U.S. Forestry Service, who still owns the property to this day. Now, it appears that Reese's scheme, or his plan, was to quickly sell the southern half of the property and to flip the whole thing for a profit, but he was unsuccessful. First National Bank foreclosed on that parcel in May of 1983. First National Bank's president at the time, Bill Gottschall, recognized the historical significance of the property, and in 1988, the bank sold 140 acres to Jerry Morrison, but retained 20.43 acres in the middle of Greenfield Farm, where most of the structures are located. It's like the farmhouse, the lodge, and presumably the commissary. In 1990, First National Bank conveyed the 20.43 acres to the University of Mississippi Foundation, and that is how Ole Miss came to own a part of Greenfield Farm. So John T. is now going to come up and tell the rest of the story. So, John T.
So I'll be brief so y'all can ask Jim questions. So, you know, by way of the title of this Greenfield Farm will become a writer's residency where writers from Mississippi, broadly defined, can spend a week to 3 weeks at a time working on a big project. And we'll define writers in the broadest sense of that word too. If you're a librettist working on a score, yes. If you're a songwriter, if you're a screenwriter, if you're a novelist, yes. If you're a poet, yes. If you put words on a page, yes. We'll, at a later date, do a full reveal of the plans, but I wanted to give y'all a hint of where we're headed. So this is a design of the campus itself. Think about it as a micro campus of our university. There's an entrance gate there at the bottom. One is the old corn crib Jim spoke of. Two is Will Campbell's cabin. Will Campbell, the Baptist preacher, one-time director of religious life at this university, really fine writer and civil rights activist. We're repatriating Will Campbell, a Mississippian, moving his cabin down from Tennessee. Up above there, 3 is the gathering pavilion, the gathering shed, we call it. 4 is a residency manager space. You heard it's 15 miles out. We need somebody to live out there and take care of it. And then I'm going to show you in a moment pictures of what the studios will look like the writers live in. That corn crib and Will Campbell cabin will be day commute studios. So if you live within driving distance of that space, then you'll be able to use that for a month at a time. The overnight studios, those number 5s, notice how they jut back into the woods. The idea is that they pierce the woods, but they're in proximity to each other, because one of the things we want to do is make Mississippi whole. That means a family who's a writer who's 5 generations deep in Chicago, we want to find a way to bring them back to Mississippi to do creative work. But if you live in Chicago, you like the woods until you're in the woods. And I grew up in the woods, and I'm telling you, like late night in the woods, you need proximity. So all of those are within sight of each other, but they have different view sheds. So we worked with a firm out of Fayetteville, Arkansas, Marlin Blackwell Architects, one of the best firms genuinely in the nation. And they listened to us in terms of design. So when I show you what one of the cabins will look like, I think you'll see the roots of a shotgun house, and you'll also see the roots of a dog trot. So dog trots, you know, with a central passageway, shotguns go deep, and I give you the shot trot. So with the idea is lengthy like a dog trot, like a shotgun is. The passageway is on the back. So the front is where the writer will work and live, and the back, on the back end of the breezeway, is where they will work. They'll literally cross the passageway to do their work. And that is it. I'll leave it on there. Thank y'all for coming. Mr. Gulley, please come up to take questions.